For a few minutes here, I'm going to be talking with Chris Pratt, the filmmaker for Deceptions, and you can also find my interviewing him at gctv.org/videos. And at Flyby News, in the category, you just go and you'll see Deceptions. I just want to ask Chris a few questions regarding this direct democracy. Do you think this is our best chance for reclaiming our country and government, or do you have another idea? Or
well, I think it's a huge first step, and hopefully from it, other things will happen that'll make an investigation possible. Everything is the public seems to be in denial about so many basic facts. I'm hoping they can get to that, critical mass.
Right.
So that, well, I think, what is it, 50% of the public has to vote?
I would
How
say,
does that work?
I believe if you have more people than voted in the last presidential election for this initiative. Then it becomes a fact.
It becomes part of the Constitution, or it becomes an amendment to the Constitution.
And then we'd be like another branch of the government. So there would still be the representative government that we elected, supposedly.
Yeah, I was going to say the representative.
And the executive branch, but we'd be able to enact laws directly from referendum votes, which we do have rights to in about 24 states. And when Mike Gravel was here, we talked about getting a referendum in Massachusetts to have a Citizens 9/11 Commission. And it would be a lot simpler to do that if this national initiative was passed. So after 2 years, this 9/11 truth movement really didn't take off, Mike Gravel has gone back to his national campaign in order to work on that. But again, next year, if people want to get a referendum in Massachusetts, I would certainly support that.
There's another person called Ian Woods, I think is his name, and he is the publisher of
Global Outlook?
Global Outlook. And he's also a big advocate for direct democracy.
Yeah.
And there's, I think, countries that Switzerland comes to mind. I can't remember, but there's another country where direct democracy is actually happening.
Well, I tell you, if the United States could do this, it would inspire this throughout the world. So it wouldn't just be a national initiative; it would be
an
international, and it would stop the pseudo democracy from taking over people's minds. Because then we would really have debates. We would make use of the internet and discuss. And if the people would vote for something that isn't too helpful, which you can have, a majority that loses touch. First of all, you still have the checks and balances of the Justice Department and the other legislatures, but you also you can correct yourself when you find you made a mistake. And as long as the 99% interests are represented, then we have a participation in power, and we're no longer slaves to a system that has bought up politics and the media and our minds.
Yeah. I'm glad you put media in there, because I really think they've enabled a lot of the delusion is media. I think if we had a mainstream media that was responsible and that held the powers to be accountable for all the crap that we have to deal with, most of this would not have happened. And I think the public, thinks it's all the people they elect. And we know those people have been on the take for most of their electoral lives, and media doesn't hold them accountable because media is owned by the same people, and that's the travesty of this whole thing, is that most people are unaware that they've been duped.
Well, they also support the cover-up. So you have Peter Jennings in the film Dark Legacy, JFK, and George Bush and the murder of John F. Kennedy, basically, using his credibility for the image that he takes, and saying that 3/4 of the American people, believe in, that there's a conspiracy, and you just happen to be wrong because I'm Peter Jennings and I'm saying that, and so you have to wonder, the control of the media is very extensive. Even Amy Goodman, when she talks about Osama bin Laden being killed just recently, she doesn't question the official version. She doesn't say alleged. Because when somebody's dumped in the sea, there's no proof, and you have proof that the government lies all the time. Why would she, go along with that? And that's Pacifica. That's her overlords and the nonprofit groups that she represents that get funding if she follows along with a certain criteria, even though a lot of her work are wonderful, and I publish and post her articles a lot of times because not many other media goes that far.
Right.
But there's limitations in Amy Goodman, which the left groups call the gatekeepers.
Right.
And that gives the
usually 9/11 kind of is the Iron Curtain for most everybody in media.
Right, and it also taken away the peace movement from the real root of the justification for these wars, even though President Obama and the other presidents said that we're there because of 9/11. Yeah. You would think that it would, raise a flag, a red flag, a false flag operation that was. And so after this film, I think you can see that there's so much evidence in the conspiracies that it's almost like a conspiracy not to believe in what we have as evidence and scientific fact.
And hopefully the internet. I mean, one of the things that I don't remember where I read it, but I read someplace that secret societies are going to have a harder and harder time to get by as information becomes more and more prevalent. And the internet, I mean, I can do research in seconds, and I can get it verified in 3 or 4 different sources. So I think the elite in the secret world that we live in and the secret society that has grown up is going to have a harder and harder time. Whether it's these kind of interviews that are happening in a non-mainstream way, well, in the next 5 years, it's going to be impossible to hide this stuff. Yeah. So I think whether it's Kennedy, which really kind of I think didn't necessarily start it, but it certainly put it into fast forward. When he was assassinated, everything kind of went big time after him. But I really do think it's really late. It's like, when was he assassinated? How many years?
It'll be 50 years next year, in 2013, November 22nd.
That's right.
And that will allow a lot of investigation or a lot of awareness about that issue. And,
but 50 years, it's really incredible.
It's 50 years, and since we went over the 10-year marker for 9/11, it made me feel like, well, 9/11 has gone into that same zone.
The same cycle?
Yeah, the same zone. So, and there hasn't been enough unity, though. We try to challenge the architects and engineers and others to work with us on a political movement for direct democracy.
Right.
And I believe that Mike Gravel was attacked within the truth movements and others that you would think that would be supportive because of infiltration and interest to destroy not just the 9/11 Truth Movement and the state initiatives, but the national initiative for direct democracy. That's a great threat. Mm-hmm. But you're saying that with the media we should know more, but very few people are questioning the issue in Syria right now. You have Webster Tarpley and others like him, but they're very few and far between. Amy Goodman reports every day, how the government's. But when you look at the incentive, who benefits from the massacres that have taken place? It would be the last thing the government would support or do because it justifies the civil war or the counterintelligence efforts and stuff, and so. I tend to believe with them, even though it's a dictatorship and they're flawed incredibly. But then, can you imagine, another false flag operation massacring children and women? It's almost like they don't think you ever will go there, so they do it.
Yeah, they don't think you're ever going to question, and that's kind of how they get away with it. But I think that. There's a perceptible twitch in the American public. They're still, for the most part, asleep. Yeah. But I think they're starting to twitch a bit and say, well, wait a second, maybe I shouldn't trust everything that I hear on the news. Maybe I shouldn't trust what CBS and NBC and CNN and all the major networks are telling me. Maybe I should try and verify things on my own. And that's why alternative news, one of them is Real News Network. They take no government funding, no business funding. They're just 100% no foundation funding. They're all people. And I think those kind of media outlets are starting to become more and more popular, and people are starting to say, wait a second. When I go to alternative news, I hear a totally different tale. So even if they're both lying, somewhere in the middle is probably what you should be relying on. And they're not. And so I think they're starting to wake up. I think the internet has been a huge wake-up call. That's why it's been targeted so heavily. I mean, there's not a month that goes by that, for security reasons, the internet is not being targeted by the same people that don't want the word to get out.
Right. Well, another point I'd like to make after watching this film is, countering the hopelessness and the overpowering element, because even though people are waking up and we have these mechanisms, they have mechanisms in place for a new world order, for the collapse of the economy, for whatever crisis they want to create or happen. And we've already lost our habeas corpus rights, and this goes back to 1200s. Can you imagine going back 800 years in evolution
Obama made a huge speech about the importance of habeas corpus, and it was the National Defense Authorization Act that had that in there, that they could kind of, if he calls you a terrorist, I mean, they could make you vanish, basically.
So,
you
people...
no habeas corpus yet? No.
So are you voting this year?
That's a dilemma, because there's one place I read that says you should not vote because you're supporting, whether it's a Democrat or Republican, they're both fascists, they're both heavily infiltrated, and they're both owned by big business. And Obama's really bad, and Romney's
worse.
Yeah. So
worse and worse, or without.
It's a lesser of evil. Politics always is lesser of evils, and the people at the top, the people that are, they don't see the differences. So you and I can, because there definitely are differences between Democrats and Republicans at our level, but at their level it doesn't make a difference. And it's like banks; they fund both sides of the war. Well, they had the funding is almost 50-50 between Democrats and Republicans, or maybe 60-40. So they cover their bets either way. And either way, you're never going to get regulatory reform that has any teeth. You're never going to regulate derivatives. Romney says it's because we've been over-regulated that we've had our banking problems, and any fool knows that it's because we have no regulations. That's why we have our banking problems. So to make a long story short, I'm still undecided as to whether I should vote or not.
Well, I can't vote for Obama this time because I've been telling people, well, I don't know much about him, that's why I'm voting for him, and the worst and the worst thing. But there's also a benefit for not voting, is that it brings down the bar for this direct democracy initiative. So that, in 2008, everybody voted, and if there's less people voting, then
I see. Then it makes it easier for direct. That's a good point. That's
also if
further purpose for not voting. Further reason for not voting.
But then there's the Cynthia McKinney and the Green Party, and it's hard not to vote for her.
Yeah.
She's a 9/11 truther.
Is she running?
I think she's going to be running again.
Oh, wow.
So, I mean,
that would be the only other thing, would be some sort of independent or different party that might get my vote.
What are the reasons that you think that John F. Kennedy was taken out?
Well, one of the theories is that I think he was about to introduce a new monetary system, without going through the Fed. And the banks and the money people got a lot of the theories that the banks and the money people didn't like that. And one of the reasons he was assassinated was because he was going to threaten the very foundations of most of these other groups. So that was funded. And you probably know that I think Obama's second largest contributor was Citibank, I think. And the banks, or the financial industry as a sector, if you put them all together, were second highest contributors for his campaign. So, I mean, the money's insipid and it's everywhere. And, if people have an illusion that Obama is some sort of saving grace, he's slicker, and he gives you the illusion that he's about real change. But if you look at what he said during his campaign and what he's delivered as president, I mean, it's unbelievably hypocritical.
And it's unbelievable that so many people still believe in his style so much that they don't see these actions that lost the habeas corpus, that that can kill citizens anywhere.
He signed the Patriot Act unchanged. It's almost like a Nazi piece of legislation. It's got the most restrictive languages in it. It's a dismantling of the Constitution. And he didn't even change it.
And he's a constitutional law professor.
Exactly.
Well, it's. I'm convinced he was an agent from early on, and he did all this for show, and he knew how to relate to the activist community.
It's just amazing to me that I have one of the videos I did was Obama breaks 16 promises, and I took footage, his campaign footage, and him saying all of these things, and then I took what's happened since he's been president, and all of them didn't happen. And they're pretty serious lies, like wiretapping, I'll do away with it. Protests, I mean, I'm not going to watch you or arrest you or do anything because you exercise your constitutional rights to assemble. An unjust war and complain about it. All these things he said.
Universal health care.
Yeah.
Getting rid of the prison industrial complex.
Nuclear waste. Remember, he actually signed a legislation to give some companies in Georgia federal loans to build nuclear reactors. I mean, unbelievable.
But did he ever speak against nuclear power?
I don't know if he did, but he's certainly been a big handle a big enabler of his growth.
Because they were the main funders of his campaign too.
Oh, really?
And that's why I was very nervous, even though I didn't know much about him.
Where he got the Peace Prize, and and even I can't remember the exact title, but it was somebody in his administration talked about the Al Qaeda in Afghanistan being tiny.
Yes.
And I mean, number one, it was supposed to be about getting bin Laden, whether we believe or not believe in that. Then it shifted into going after Al Qaeda because they could launch terrorist attacks. Now Al Qaeda doesn't exist, and so now suddenly it's the Taliban.
Yes.
Which is no terrorist threat to us at all. They're basically a local regime. I mean, they're thugs. They're not necessarily the greatest people in the world, but they're certainly not a terrorist threat to U.S. citizens over here.
Unless you're seeing it from a warped mentality and believe that we need a lot of this poppy seed growth in order to sell the heroin to finance our black operations against terrorism.
Right.
And the Taliban was very good at stopping the poppy growth. And as soon as we got in there, we made deals with the warlords, and they make more money from this drug than they do from the oil wells in Saudi Arabia and other places. So you wonder why.
And they also have pipelines, so they get probably both.
Yes, and minerals.
Yeah, what is it they say?
Exploitation.
The big cabals are between oil, banks, guns, and drugs is pretty much the whole enchilada.
Yeah, and he goes to Mexico, but he doesn't end the drug war there by decriminalizing drugs and making it into a health issue rather than a criminal issue. Yeah,
it was Chris Hedges that I think really, he wrote the book. He actually was an investigative journalist for the New York Times. He won a Pulitzer Prize while he was there. And he wrote the book, The Empire of Illusion. And that's what it is, and that's what media and everything else is to give people, and it's unbelievably good because most people still believe it.
Yes.
And it's all illusion. It's all, that your vote actually makes a difference between, real change in this country. It's not going to happen through the voting process the way it is now. So it's all illusion. Everything is not what happens, but what you think happens because of what you're told.
Now, at the last showing that we showed Dark Legacy, JFK and 9/11 at the Media Ed, we had I think 20, 30-year analyst for the CIA there that's retired.
Right.
And of all the programs that we covered, he said the moon issue was the most well done, that was most convincing to him.
Yeah.
And but I have to warn people, if you talk about the moon landing hoax, be ready to get ridiculed, be ready to get, like ignored, or because, people are so programmed that they just simply respond that way. And I would recommend rebuttaling that with, then why hasn't anybody gone through the Van Allen belt in all this time? And when they tried in 1998, as in the movie, they were forced down because the radiation was so intense at only 350 miles from the Earth that the astronauts could see the flashes of radiation with their eyes closed. And the Van Allen belt really gets thick at 1,000 miles and goes for 25,000 miles into space. And then when we recently went to the moon robotically, it took them 3 months in order to angle it so they can get caught into the orbit of the moon so they could take the pictures there. Yeah. 3 months, and then in the 60s, and then you look at what they accomplished in 2010, and you realize, there's something strange here, and Russia was way ahead of us, and they haven't gone through the Van Allen belt. And that footage that shows NASA astronauts faking they were halfway to the moon, to me is evidence, as well as the circumstantial evidence of losing the original moon landing tapes. So don't be bothered if they ridicule you. It takes a long time, but it gets stronger and stronger. And I suggest that you go to that movie and watch it a few times, because it takes that long to get rid of all our belief systems in a way.
To purge yourself of everything you've been told. I think that's one of the big problems, is that in order to be open to looking at the facts, to exploring the other side, you pretty much have to erase everything you've been told. Everything that's been ingrained in your psyche since you've been a child, basically, is now up for grabs. And most people are not ready to let go of that. So they're not ready to objectively look at both sides. I'm not saying, things happen one way or the other on 9/11, but we certainly know that there's a whole lot of unanswered questions. And at the minimum, it should be reinvestigated. How anybody can argue an investigation is just mind-boggling. The only way they can be is if they're so brainwashed into letting go of these old belief systems that they're not willing to.
Yeah.
So whether you have one train of thought or one belief system or another, no one can deny that there's a zillion unanswered questions, a zillion unresolved issues. And no one can argue the fact that they should be at least an investigation, which is what was the guy's name that who's doing the direct democracy?
Mike Gravel,
Senator Gravel. He was all about that initially. He said, come on, who can deny the fact that we should at least be investigating this? Yeah. And he had a hard time. So it really just goes to show you how ingrained and how insipid the control is. And that, when you're turning on CBS News or CNN or all these things and you think you're getting news, it's filtered information. And it's absolutely, these guys just look at teleprompters and they read what somebody else has written.
Well, it's not just the losing all our information, but being more critical in what's missing, the between the lines, because the year after, Kennedy was killed, and we were young then, and most of us, some of us weren't born, and many of us were young, it was just like a haze. But the year after he was killed, it took me many years later to find out that they exploded a nuclear bomb in the Van Allen belt. And then you find out that this whole moon landing element is very questionable, and then you find that science is really under attack with the steel frame buildings, the way they fall down. So all I can say is that our civilization is at the place where it's falling down almost as quickly as the buildings, based on spin rather than on intellectual interest of what's true, and it has to do with fear rather than love, to deal with, well, here we are in a world of nature, of biodiversity and beauty, and why don't we appreciate that more in order to overcome our fears, so we can then to see what things are in reality.
The controlling elite now have us slave to our most basic instincts. Whether it's reality TV or greed or fearful of having food to eat or a job or whatnot. We've become, it's almost like reverse evolution is occurring. We're becoming more ape-like as we progress than intelligent, feeling, moral human beings that care about their neighbor. And we've chosen fear over love. And one of the things, there's a movie that I got from a friend of mine, Dennis Morso, that they showed that conditioning people to fear is stronger than love. People, when they're fearful, are harder to swing over to love.
I think that fear is basically the absence of love. And love, there's no fear. And we all go back and forth, so we all have to deal with it. But then we find that if you're afraid of something and you deal with it and you put it in front of you and put it in the light, It's no longer so scary and controlling and dangerous. You can actually do something about it, and then you're being motivated by love rather than controlled by, I don't want to look at this. Let's hide. And where can we go? It's a small planet.
And the thing that I'm finding out too is that there are a lot of things that you can do that don't put you at risk. I think we've been indoctrinated to say that we cannot be true to ourselves and true to our convictions and what we think is right and what we think is wrong without marching in the streets and without putting our life at risk and having direct confrontation with the police force. There's a zillion things that can be done right away at no risk, which is just you becoming who you are and who you want to be.
Right.
And that's, I think, the ultimate challenge is not to just keep pointing our fingers at the bad guys, because we keep enabling them.
Right.
We have to look in the mirror and say, what is it in us that allows this to happen?
Right.
And that's really, I think, underneath it all, what it's all about.
Well, that's why I like interviewing you. In the health blog section at Flyby News, I have the concept of AIR, A-I-R. It's an acronym that I use for something that took me at least 25 years to learn. And I use it to remind myself of how to deal with relationships, including the one with myself. And A is for appreciation, because there's so much to appreciate. If you're going to focus on something else, you're doing it, but there's so much to appreciate. I is for introspection. Exactly what you said about, the only person you can really change is yourself, and just, look within and see what's going on within you. And R is for respect. And between those three elements, I find I'm no longer judging. I can have a good relationship with myself because I'm no longer complaining. I'm appreciating, and so those elements are as important. And music, and that's why there's music in this film. But I encourage people to be in nature, to balance out all this information, and see the beauty in life, and truth in the beauty of friendships and life itself.
One of the things that I'm sometimes leery of with this spiritual reawakening that seems to have occurred. I mean, we've kind of gone away from the traditional religions and are being mindful and trying to grow within, which I don't disagree with at all. But part of that also has to be incorporating, seeing what's going on.
Right.
You can't just escape and listen to music and go off in Nana land and say, I'm being mindful, everything's wonderful. Meanwhile, the black Buddha is sticking your head in the ground. I mean, so you have to kind of know what to repel to know what to embrace.
And it's very hard to know what fear is sometimes, because it's so subtle that you could convince yourself you're loving and everything, doing all the spiritual stuff, and underneath it there's a fear element of distracting yourself from the realities that we're dealing with.
You can only go so far. I mean, at some point you just got to say, who am I, what do I stand for, and what am I prepared to do? And get comfortable with whatever those final decisions are, and not just pretend they don't exist. I mean, we've enabled the world we live in. It wasn't just bad guys. If it is, we're bad too.
If you can help by showing this film in your community TV station or have a public showing, please contact me. And you'll find my email address at the bottom of Flyby News, or it's at flybynews@hughes.net is my email address at the time. And I just want to thank everybody and Chris for coming here and joining me for this program. And again, also to Greenfield Community Television for giving us the opportunity to produce this show here. And they've been great helpers. Thank you again, and hope to see you around.